Welcome everybody. This is the Kinross-shire Committee of the 14th of May. Welcome. And then we'll do the screen. So David, do you want to start?
I'm David Cairns from representing Catch here this evening.
Thank you.
Will there also one of the work councillors?
I'm Nicholas Roski, Place Strategies Manager and Food Planning Officer at Perth and Kinross Council.
Matt Davis, I'm the Mobility Strategy Lead at Perth and Kinross Council.
Richard Waters, Councillor and Vice Convener of this committee.
I'm Dave Cuthbert, Convener of this committee.
I'm Chris Easton, Business Growth Team Leader and the Lead Officer for this committee.
Richard Dobson, Physical Infrastructure Project Manager for Estates and Commercial Investment.
Margaret Ponton, Chair of Glenford Community Council. Lynn Hatch, Portmore Community Council.
And Rory Stewart, Flooding Engineer with Perth and Kinross Council.
Excellent. And on screen we have Councillor Neil Freshwater. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi everyone, Neil Freshwater. One of the 4 ward councillors for Kinross-shire.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt Welch, Project Officer, Traffic and Road Safety.
David West online. I see that
Chris is here.
Chris has turned up as well. You can introduce yourself though, David.
Not with your mic off.
You need to turn your microphone on.
That's better.
All right, we'll forget that. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris Collins. I'm here also from Kinross Community Council.
Okay, I don't have any apologies as such. As I say, Angus Cheap was hoping to turn up for bus away, so wait and see if he does. Does anyone have any declarations of interest on anything on the agenda tonight? Nope, nobody's interested. Okay, moving on to the minutes of the meeting of the 19th of February. Are we all happy with the minute? Yes.
Can I just ask just a little update on the minute? At the last meeting, Michael Finlay gave the paper with the upgrades to the Kinross Park and Ride, and there was a decision made on option 2 on that, and there was also a request that came out of it for officers to have a look at the amount of car parking spaces that were getting lost. Michael's went back and rejigged some of the layout with still all the same components to minimise car park loss to two normal car park spaces and one disabled car parking space. And given that the instruction was already there to ask them to do that, I don't think it's a change. I did speak to Dave about this and he agreed that basically that we're okay for Michael to run ahead with that project, given that he's actually asked what the committee wanted to achieve, and that was to minimise the car parking loss at the park and ride, while still upgrading the park and ride quite considerably. I think if there's any comments people want on that, just either catch us after, or when Matthew Welch gives his, maybe let him know and he can pass it on to.
I think Matthew might be covering it slightly in what he's going to be saying. Is that right, Matthew?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we'll deal with it then. But in principle, there's been a slight redesign, but I took the view, Richard took the view that it wasn't material. So we'll see what Matthew's got to tell us later on. So moving on, I think we're going to rejig the agenda slightly. We're going to bring the mobility strategy forward, because you need to catch a bus later on. So if you want to take the lead.
That's really helpful. Yes, thanks very much.
And well, Matt's, how long have you been in the council now?
It was June last year.
9 months. I was going to guess about 9 months or something. Probably about right. But Matt's mobility strategy is a huge future strategy, one of the major strategies within the council that we're taking forward. The main documents due to come before the Climate Change Sustainability Committee 2 weeks yesterday, and Matt's just going to give a flavour of that to this committee first, to give us everybody a wee bit of a pre-look at it.
The sneak preview, yes. The reports are not even online yet.
Any comments or anything like that. So it would be worth just covering, so that people understand exactly what mobility mobility
Yes.
is needed.
Yeah.
So it can be quite
Pick up on down.
Yeah, for the mobility strategy is, I suppose more commonly it's known as a local transport strategy. So it's a strategy, it's not statutory, it's a voluntary strategy, but it's one that most local authorities will develop a local transport strategy to direct how they work, their road network, supported bus services, rail, covers all modes of transport really, freight and the like. They don't tend to cover, like not all the things that are in the strategy are under the control of the council. So for instance, the rail network is run by the government, freight is run privately, but there's a lot of things. I would say about 80% of the strategy are things that Perth and Kinross can directly control, and the rest of the things in it are things that we need to work with partners on, like the rail industry, like the regional transport partnership and so on. But it really sets out what the council's priorities are for transport for the next 15 years. The strategy was adopted in October 2024. So what we're bringing today and to the committee in a few weeks is a progress update of the first 18 months of the strategy to see how things have been going. Go on to the next slide, Magda. So these are the recommendations in the report. The first one, as I said, is a progress update on delivery. The second one is we are revising the action plan, rationalising it a bit. We've through the monitoring and evaluation, we've found some degree of overlap between the actions. There's 167 actions currently in the plan, and we found that there's like duplication and overlap in some of the actions. So we've rationalised it down to about 125.6 by looking at that duplication. There's also a few things that have been completed, and there's a few things where they're really kind of business as usual activities that we felt like it was probably worth removing those to focus on all the new stuff. So aside from the revised action plan, yes, we're going to propose a new monitoring and evaluation framework that will tell us about whether we're meeting our objectives on the extent to which we're doing that. And finally, we've got one of the projects from the mobility strategy we're going to look for approval to start engagement on. This is the project Perth Transport Futures City Centre, which I'll come on to in a bit. Next slide, please. So the main thing about the strategy is that it's guided by a series of objectives that were set when we developed the strategy a couple of years ago. On the left-hand side, the coloured things, they are the themes from the national transport strategy, which regional and local transport strategies should align with. So the themes for the national, you can see there: reducing inequalities, take climate action, economic growth, and health and well-being. And the objectives we set on the right there for our strategy, you can see how they fit in with those. If you go on to the next slide, because they're quite wordy, and these are kind of like an easy read version of what the objectives are. So if I just go through them one by one, we've got improved transport affordability, improve access to jobs and services for all. So that's got the inclusive element in it. Reduce transport emissions, improve network resilience, improve network reliability and efficiency, improve sustainable transport use and uptake in new developments, increase the amount of freight moved sustainably, improve labour market access, and then the three at the bottom linked to health, they're improve safety, health and air quality. And when this strategy was developed, a sifting exercise was done with a even bigger list of potential actions in it, and they were mapped to the objectives, and the ones that were kept in were the ones that performed best against the objectives of the strategy. Because they're not evenly spread, but there is a strong climate focus, and indeed the strategy itself was the climate change strategy that mandated that we should develop the mobility strategy. So that's probably quite good that we have that alignment. Move on to the next slide. So one of the things we'll highlight in the report is some of the key delivery highlights from the first 18 months. So you can read them on the screen, but the first two relate to Perth Transport Futures. So we've got the road improvements around the edge of Perth, and then we have the city centre plan, which is actually phase 4 of Perth Transport Futures, that looks at improving the sustainable transport offering in Perth city centre and reducing traffic dominance. You'll be aware of the 20 mile/hour speed limits that are being rolled out both across Perth and Kinross and across Scotland as part of Transport Scotland's strategy. Electric vehicle charging points is another one that's been quite a lot of progress on recently. So we've got significant funding from Transport Scotland to install quite a lot more public EV charging points over the next 3 years, and we're just in the process of going out to tender to get a private operator, because the proposal really is that the private operator will take on the new installations and the maintenance of the existing charge point network, which is significant already. Number 5 there, an active travel one, that the bikeability training in schools, particularly in primary schools, has been going very well at the start of the strategy, and I believe the delivery rate is about the same this year as well. Next slide. And this is one that you were interested in, Councillor Waters. You brought the traffic modelling software. So we're bringing traffic modelling capability in-house in the council. Previously, we've had to go to consultants who run the Perth traffic model and the other traffic models around the council area. So by doing this, we're going to support the traffic modelling and the transport assessments that are needed for the local development plan. And they're going to be local traffic models that haven't been updated since before COVID, that will be traffic surveys, and those models will be updated in the near future. One of those is going to be Kinross Milnathort, and I think it was either 2017 or 2018 the last time they were updated. But there are other local models around Perth and Kinross as well, Crieff and other settlements. Number 7, Dunkeld Road. This is a project that's been going on for a long time, and started off as an active travel improvements project on the Dunkeld Road corridor in Perth, and now it's kind of expanded its scope, probably quite rightly, to be more of an integrated bus and active travel improvements project. But basically we're designing street improvements on the Dunkeld Road, funded by Transport Scotland, and seeking to improve the bus reliability and provide better facilities for active travel, in particular for cycling. Number 8, one that was mentioned just a few minutes ago, Park and Rides. We've been doing some investigative work in the transport planning team on the existing usage and patterns of usage of the Park and Rides, both at Kinross and at Broxden. And over the coming year, we're going to be undertaking a study to look at some of the proposed new sites and look at options and the business case for those, mostly in and around the Perth area. But the Kinross study was quite interesting because it highlighted that, well, both the Park and Rides actually are mostly used as kind of regional coach interchanges primarily. You know, the majority of journeys at Kinross are to and from Edinburgh. Broxden's a bit more split, but it's basically to all the cities across Scotland, including Edinburgh and Glasgow. So that's interesting, because I think when Broxden was set up, it was set up to be a kind of hub for Perth, for journeys in and out of Perth, but actually it's not being used that way much anymore. It's primarily to help people get, you know, right across Scotland by coach, is how it's supposed to be. And the last one, Transport Transformation Project. This is an ongoing review that the public transport team are doing, looking at the bus powers in the 2019 Transport Act. And there's going to be a report expected to full council in September, looking at how we could use those powers and what the future bus network provision could be. So they're just a few highlights from things that have been delivered over the last 18 months, some of which were started before the strategy was adopted, but most of them are much more recent than that. Okay, next slide. I think you've gone back one, just forward a couple. And again, two more forward.
Apologies, it froze. Give me 1 second.
Right. It was my computer was freezing earlier. So if you had it run off my computer, then you wouldn't get any slides moving at all. So
That's great when it works.
yeah, I could do, yeah.
Ask a question while we're
Please.
looking to get it up. In terms of the sort of futures thing for Perth, will you be doing a futures thing for Kinross-shire at some point? So
Yes, I think that's very much the plan.
I mean, you mentioned the looking at the sort of the pattern of journeys and stuff using the mapping, but the Muirs is becoming more and more difficult to get up and down it from Kinross to Monmouthorpe because there's only one junction. So is there any sort of this forward planning with LTP3? Is there going to be some sort of look at that to see whether we can find a solution? I don't know what that solution might be.
So I mean,
Well, it will come through the modelling that Matt's referred to in terms of that town modelling. That very much will give us those specific. And the reason it links into LDP3 is also to test the sites, potential new sites, and what that impact could have. And that's just potential at this point. So yes, absolutely. What the answer could be, who knows? But that's what you need to test for them.
Okay, thank you.
but the interesting thing about Perth Transport Futures is that we very much see it as the first of several settlements to be looked at in that kind of way. So there's an action to look at Perth, but there's another action to look at towns and villages across Perth and Kinross, which hasn't been started yet. But the idea would be that we take the learning from things that we do in Perth and apply them to, Kinross, Blakehowery, Crieff, and other settlements. And I believe there's a new team getting set up in the economic development team that's going to look at place and different settlements by settlement plans, which will be coming forward. So those two things will kind of fit together pretty nicely.
There's your chance. The slides are back now.
So in terms of the monitoring and evaluation framework, the purpose of this primarily is to monitor those objectives. Now, the objectives are quite broad. They will be influenced by the actions that we undertake in Perth and Kinross and the partners we work with, but they'll also be influenced by wider societal change. So they're really, really important to see how much of the action that we're taking is it shifting the dial much on things like affordability, transport emissions, and so on. So for each of those objectives, we've outlined some indicators and data sources, and we've put baseline data in. So there's just a couple of examples there. For instance, on the carbon emissions, we have the modal share for journeys by different modes of transport that comes out from the Scottish Government every year, every 2 years, depending on which way you look at it. And so for each objective, there will be a series of indicators that we intend to come back to committee every 2 years to report on how and test the water of how much things have changed.
Could I?
Yeah.
Can we ask a question with that? I'm sorry, it's
Vice Convener.
Vice Convener Richard. I read recently that with the introduction of the new 20 mile an hour limits, it's actually increased the amount of CO2 being generated because, especially in combustion engines, because they're running flat at a lower gear, and also it's reducing the quality of air in many places because of the low speeds that they're travelling. The engines aren't working efficiently. Have you found that out?
There's not, I mean, it's been reported before in the press, but there's not really clear evidence on that. I mean, air quality tends to depend on, the volume of traffic and also how things like how close the buildings are to the road and things like that. So it's really probably the main thing that's going to impact air quality is how much traffic there is. There may be a very small impact on those things you've said, but there isn't really conclusive evidence I'm aware of on those. But certainly on the 20 mile an hour, the kind of health and safety benefits from that probably.
So it's actually worthwhile generating more CO2 if it makes the roads safer for pedestrians and cyclists and things.
Well, one thing I don't think there's evidence that going at 20 miles an hour generates more CO2, but certainly something we can look and see if there is any evidence on that.
We're collecting the data. Exactly, that's what I'm asking. Yes. Yeah. Be interesting to know.
But there's a lot of data being collected in Perth, the bridge end and stuff like that. My understanding is that, with bridge end, because it's got that canyon out there, and the council have a permanent monitoring station there, that there's the CO2 and the pollutions, the particular, which is the real issue, is actually going down. But there may be other factors involved, the police, like the cars that just automatically cut off when you come to a junction. So they're not, because the bigger particulate, my understanding, that are released are when cars are stationary at junctions, and the new Volkswagens and all that kind of technology that will cut off. There's a case that may be helping some of the numbers go down.
Okay.
Yeah, the braking leads to the particulates coming off the brake,
That's
wear and things like that is one of the things. Go to the next slide, please. So yeah, I'm just going to finish with a couple of the projects that are coming forward over the next year, or we hope that they are anyway. We intend to start engagement on Perth Transport Future City Centre over the next 12 months. And as I said, the reason that we're taking this forward, or one of the reasons, is it's the second action in the plan. And the aim is to reduce car dominance in Perth City Centre and improve the sustainable and active travel offering. But it was also part of Perth Transport Futures. That was the intention, that the creation of the Crosstown Link Road would divert traffic away from the city centre. And that reduction in traffic in the city centre allows us to reallocate road space. So you could maybe think of as excess, in inverted commas, road space with less traffic to other uses, things like bus priority, wider pavements, better public realm, things like that, things to make the city centre more attractive. So we've done some work on this, as it says there, a conceptual plan has been done in the feasibility, looking at what an arrangement of how the city centre could be laid out with bus priority and other measures in it. And then we've done traffic modelling on that proposal. And what that shows is that delivering the actions technically feasible, i.e. we're not seeing significant congestion or increases in traffic as a result of the proposal, even though some of the traffic that is in the central core of the city centre will be diverted to the inner ring road. That's the purpose. We want to remove the through traffic from the very core of the city centre, like South Street, Scott Street, those kind of streets, and traffic that still needs to pass through the area will go around the inner ring road. But hopefully it will also make it less attractive for people who are making longer journeys and going right through the city centre to continue to do that. Maybe they will divert by other routes. So at the moment, we're seeking approval to commence engagement on this, because so far we've got a conceptual plan, but we need to refine it, and particularly we need to speak to businesses and stakeholders about the operational requirements of the city centre. But we also want to speak to residents and visitors from right across Perth and Ross and beyond. And in terms of the purpose of the engagement there below, yes, it will be informing people what this proposal is and why it's being developed. But also we want to see what people think about some of the trade-offs that would be required to implement it, because there'll have to be some trade-offs. So for instance, are people willing to improve the public realm and introduce more greenery if it meant there was slightly less on-street parking or not? And that's the kind of question that we'll put to them. But as part of this plan, the aim is to maintain access to all the off-street car parks. So we're not trying to prevent people coming in by car. We're just trying to make use of the space differently right in the very centre of the city centre, so that we can improve the public realm and things like that. So yeah, that'd be interesting to see what that engagement will lead to. But certainly they've done similar piece of engagement in Edinburgh, where they asked similar kind of things. And what was interesting was that when they did the public engagement and the online survey, they didn't necessarily get majority support for a lot of these things that people might think is more controversial. But then they did some market research to get a representative sample of the population. And what they found was actually it was much closer to majority support for these things. So that response bias that you often get, you know, people entering into the consultation, filling in the survey, because either they think it's a great idea or think it's an awful idea, but there's probably a lot of people in between who are, you know, more moderate in their views, and often you find that majority in favour of some of these sorts of things. So we definitely don't want to just see who shouts the loudest on this. We want to try and get a representative sample of the whole population and then see where that takes us. Okay, last slide then. And one thing that's only just starting, but it's also an action in the mobility strategy, is an active travel strategy. So Perth and Kinross Council has got one, but it's a bit old and definitely in need of being updated. Certainly hasn't been updated since the national guidance came out in 2023. So I've put the whole action on here, which is a bit wordy and lengthy for you to see, but in part just because there's reference right at the end there to the Kinross Active Travel Master Plan. So I'll be leading on the scoping for the active travel strategy, and one of the first things that I need to do is capture what's already going on right across the council area in Kinross, in Crieff, in Pitlochry, and so on, and make use of the plans that are already there. We've also got the regional active travel network plan and so on. So the strategy itself, it's going to be a plan which contains proposals for new infrastructure for walking, wheeling and cycling, but also supporting behavioural interventions, things like school cycle training, other interventions to help people and enable them to travel actively, because we know that it's not just changing the infrastructure that's important for helping people to travel actively. There's a lot of other supportive things that we need to do to make that a realistic proposal for people. And the last thing to say on the strategy is it's going to be a data-led strategy. So we have got transport demand data on where the potential for cycling is, or the relative demand for cycling is right across the Perth and Kinross area. We also need public insights to identify projects that people want to do that maybe might not come out from that kind of an exercise. So we need it to be both kind of top down and bottom up in terms of the data that we capture to inform it. But ultimately, we want to try and come up with a suite of projects that we think is likely to be the most impactful and change the most behaviour out of that. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour.
Thank you.
That wasn't too long.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's really good. Can I start off with a question and just open up to questions? The modelling, the new modelling software in doing this benchmark and doing the survey work, and in relation to the Kinross Park and Ride, does that get included in that? When you're looking at the traffic, last I remember 2017, 2018, you were looking at the cars travelling, and that's what built the base model. And just wondering, and given the paper we had last week on the Park and Ride, and quite often near capacity, when you're doing that, are you actually able to look at where people are travelling if they're going to the Park and Ride, and actually including it how many people are actually parking in the Park and Ride as part of that survey when it comes out? Because that would have a wider benefit, not just with the mobility, not just thinking about the Park and Ride and wider to see how the Park and Ride is relating to people's daily transports, and would help look at active travel as well, where you can get active travel routes to kind of stop these shorter journeys with car.
Yeah, as Matt said, we have the survey data. We undertook that at Kinross and Broxden in terms of where people were travelling from. Obviously, in terms of getting hold of that data, it was very much trying to catch people.
You're talking about the buses, though.
But talking about the buses, but that does talk.
Driving into.
No, but that is people that have driven in, parked at Kinross, and then where they were travelling to. So clearly, it's dependent on where the buses are going, but it is very much where they were travelling from. That's what we were trying to gather from that data. How far are people travelling to go to Kinross and to Broxden Park and Ride? So one, how far do they travel, and then where were they travelling on, which is why we know Broxden, for example, people aren't using it to travel into Perth.
No.
They're using it much wider. I guess we already anticipated that from Kinross anyway, and that's what that data has shown. But yes, in terms of the modelling, I'm not a traffic modeller, so I don't know exactly how that will play into it, but in terms of there will be that shift because you've got a greater proportion of people travelling to Kinross because of the park and ride. I think that's your point.
I think last time it happened, there was people all around the town doing the car registration numbers, and then they were getting mapped out, and that done the base for that done the benchmarking for the when you're doing the traffic modelling. And I don't know if David West went along to it, but we got to Cisco, I think, done it. And we got a chance to visit and actually look at the modelling for Kinross. But if that's the same benchmarking we're doing now, all my request is, which my understanding, that's what you've got to do to start.
Yeah, you've got to do the surveys.
Yeah. You've got to do that. And my question or request is just that when you're doing that, make sure that the park and ride part is a central part of that survey, and it's not, it's showing who's travelling to and from the park and ride, where they're coming.
Yeah, as opposed to travelling somewhere else. Yeah. No, we'll take note of that.
Yep. Taking note of that.
Any other questions for the map? Dave?
You want me to go first? Yeah, in terms of diverting the traffic from the city centre and going for the sort of, call it the inner ring road.
Yeah.
I have a wee bit of a passion about shopping and the centre of Perth and the need for vehicles and car parking and so on. I think one of the things I've noticed is if you look at George Street, most of the shops are occupied. If you look at South Street, most of those are occupied. But when you look at the High Street, every second shop is either it's empty or it's got a charity shop, something like that. I'm just wondering, are we in danger of taking vehicles from the shopping areas and actually cutting the footfall and therefore causing a drop in trade and therefore a further decline of the city?
Well, we definitely don't want to deliver a plan that leads to the decline of the city centre. I mean, there's quite a lot of evidence that pedestrianisation leads to increased footfall and retail affluency. So I would be surprised if it's the direct result of the pedestrianisation that's led to the vacancies in the shopping. I don't know, Kirsty, if you know any more about the economic side of this.
Let's drop you on it.
I guess we need to look at economic modelling, but I guess I would agree with you in that sense. I don't think it is that. I think there's a number of factors at the moment that's contributing to city centres not probably performing as well as they previously did, online shopping being one of them. But I also think there's lots of things that we as a council are doing at the moment to try and bring football back in, whether that's through events. We've also been given 200,000 from the current administration to improve the look and feel of the city centre. If that is successful, then that is going to be a pilot that will be rolled out across other towns. In terms of, I also note that parking has been reduced significantly in the city centre to try and get people to come back in and spend. So I guess it doesn't answer your question, but I don't necessarily think that not being able to drive down those streets affects.
But I mean, all the main off-street car parks will be maintained and access to them will be maintained. All that we're really talking about is probably a small number of spaces on a handful of streets. Can we widen the pavement and do something else with the space there? We do have parking surveys for all the on-street and off-street parking, so we know the turnover, we know how they're being used, and they're going to be repeated in the autumn.
I assume that'll be consultation led as well, that businesses and residents can feed in.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a very long period of engagement. We're very conscious that this is or will be seen potentially as a huge change, and as Matt alluded to, there will be trade-offs. There will be certain things that some people won't like, but it gives a greater benefit. So absolutely, the intention is a 12-month period of engagement, which absolutely has to include everyone but businesses as well, because we're very aware that they're sensitive to change as well.
I mean, basis for the question to some extent was we closed George Street for the JK event over the Easter weekend.
Oh yes.
And there was a huge outcry from the shopkeepers who had said that their takings had dropped dramatically and that's because they closed the road. If you think about it, that's because we stopped the parking. So what I'm saying is we need to learn from that, build that instead models. And I mean, I think active travel is great, but if you kill the city centre by doing it, it's quite carefully done. That's all.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay,
Willie.
Yeah. I think it's actually human nature. If you're going to have to go and pay to park in the centre of Perth, most people will actually go to a retail park go to a supermarket where the parking's free, you don't have to struggle to carry your stuff back to the car. And I think I've actually been on holiday the last 10 days, and I was in a number of small market towns in Scotland and England where all the parking was free, and they were really, really buoyant. Really buoyant. I couldn't believe it. I said, what's going on? And this seemed to be quite normal. But that's beside the point. What I was going to ask you was, there are plans as part of the plan to make an integrated transport hub in Perth, retail, a rail and bus hub. The bus station is terrible. We in Kinross-shire don't have any rail services, and if you're going to Perth with your cases to get to the bus station, from the bus station to the railway station in a wet day is a very unpleasant experience. So where are we with that? I know that ScotRail have said in the past they're not interested. So I think it's important. Most modern European cities have got an integrated transport hub like that, and I think it'd be really good if Perth had that too.
Yeah.
Are you making any progress at all with that?
Yeah, we're at the business case under the case that you feel has been completed for the bus and rail station, and we're just about to move into the design phase now for that. So the funding for that has to be spent by 2030. So that's the timeline we're working to, is to have a new bus station, and hopefully, I don't know if this is definite yet, the kind of space in front of the station upgraded as part of the same thing. But yeah, so design work's starting on that before too long, and it's also going to include the route between the station and the bus station and the city centre, which I think is quite soon as well.
It's worth saying it's not a replacement of the bus station, the space in front of the
No,
railway station.
let's list that because it's a beautiful building. Let's put that down.
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of the space, I won't get into that discussion, but the space in front of the railway station is not sufficient in terms
No, it won't be.
of the full space, but as long as
But
there
it's
is
still
that
got a lot of
ability,
land here.
yeah, and it's also having that clearer view of where the bus station is. If you're very new to Perth, I don't think it's necessarily that obvious where the bus station is, or let alone where the city centre is. So it's about trying to make that.
But as long as they move forward, that's good news.
Any other questions? No, Dave, you want to make a
I want to make a comment. Yeah, in terms of the transport transformation programme, I would like on public record, I'd like to see Glenfarr Community Transport Group taking on more of the bus services locally. They do a fantastic job, and if we can extend out what they do, and perhaps taking the 201 or the X56 routes and combine them into what they do, because they've raised the, what's the transport, how many people are they taking now?
Over
2,500 a week.
And what did it start at?
50.
50.
That's 2.5 years.
Yeah. So if we can widen that out, so if that can be passed back to the programme, so that they're aware of that.
We can plug that up with a public transport unit. Yeah.
I think people would agree that what they do is fantastic.
Definitely.
I've seen their stuff coming forward, and Glen Park is a big success story in the whole report, and a driver for a good example of a community transport that has actually made a huge difference socially and not just the quantity, it's the quality of the friendly drivers, of course, coming to.
I'd like to see them take over the whole of Perth. I mean, Jim, that is one thing, but that's another
volunteer drivers then, David, you're in got spare time.
When age I can do that.
Right. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Thanks very much. It was good to hear.
Okay, so shall I take back over? Yeah. Okay, now I didn't mention in apologies that Neil Bingham had given the apologies for Milnerthorpe Community Council. Unfortunately, their Community Council meetings tonight, he couldn't make it. He was due to give us a briefing on Speedwatch, but apparently Margaret Fonton here is going to make the presentation. Without what's been said.
Very brief, thank you. We are trying to move on with the Speedwatch. It's been not happening for a while. So an invitational letter has been sent to all of our community councils to try and provide a single point of contact. And we would like to know the names of people who have previously volunteered but not had responses to their applications so that we can chase them. Not had responses from all the community councils, but we're going to try and encourage them to join in with the Speedwatch system. The vetting's a very slow process with the police, but we've got another 2 volunteers on the list this last month. When we have a few more, we're going to arrange with the single point contacts and the local community officers to further the campaign. We have to then do risk assessments of suitable roads which we can stand on. So there's a lot more work to be done before the deployment, but volunteers are at the crux of this. We have all of the equipment, it's already bought. Glenfarr Community Council bought a PC Speedy this week so that we can add him to our village furniture. I think there's a few roads that are mentioned all of the time in our area that really need to be prioritised. And it's seeming more that it's up to us as community councils to action that and make sure it happens. So a plea out to the other community councils, please, that haven't responded, to come back to us, find out what it's about, and let's try and move it forward and get it out and operational.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to explain to officers what this is about, it's basically the community have been empowered by the police to have speed cameras, so they can actually put speed detection devices. They can be authorised by the police to stand by the road and actually record people who are speeding. They can then report those people to the police, who then send a letter to the people who have been speeding. And in the event there's more than one letter, the police have said they'll go and knock on doors and talk to people. But it's basically, it's designed that it's the community that's getting involved to try and leave their own street and speeds on.
Just add on to that.
Absolutely.
What we're hoping to do is not have anybody actually policing the roads in their own village, but in our own wider community. So if we had 3 people from Milnathorpe, they may come to Glenfarr, and Glenfarr people may go to Cleach or wherever else. So we're not seen as the policemen in our own communities. So the more help we get, the quicker it's going to roll out. Okay, and if anyone's living in the area is interested in doing it in their own community, contact me and I'll ask them.
And Scotland Vale and Kinnaird, they've spoken about it for a long time, and I think it was about 2 years ago. There were a lot of people volunteering, but then I think some people have lost the motivation because nothing happened to that.
I think it just went dead. Yeah, yes, but we're trying to drive it forward. So if you could encourage any of them to come back to us, then we'll try our best.
That's really the purpose of having it here tonight, so you can disseminate it to CCs. Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Richard for the next item, which is a catch.
David Cairns with CAF, the Catch organisation. I'll let David run through it all. I'm not going to give any intro because you know far more about it than I do.
Thank you.
So over to you.
Slides, camera.
While we're waiting for slides, I'm David Cairns. I've been working on the project which is called Catch. Catch stands for Climate Action Through Community Heating. It's quite an ambitious project. It originated in feeling rather depressed at the Glasgow COP and the challenge that our governments are failing to rise to drive decarbonisation through, but also a sense that at a household level, you can do so much, but actually you can't move the needle at all. At community level, we can do a lot more. And that's really what we started 4 years ago, exploring in the nature of our beautiful community situated by Loch Leven. Now, if I could have the next slide, please. The challenge is quite significant, and it has to be said here, looking to a district heating system. That's pipes in the street delivering heat
to the houses. So there's a geographic limitation. It means we're focused on the communities of Kinross and Milnathort. And I tend to talk about Kinross when I mean Kinross and Milnathort in all times. Looking arguably to the boundary of the motorway and the sort of 20 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour signs. That community is round about 4,000 properties as we look forward that are relevant. It's round about 70 gigawatt hours of heat per year. That's a significant amount. That's the same size as the heat network for the centre of Perth is planned to be. That's bigger than some of the ones that are getting going in Edinburgh to be joined up later, though it's arguably the extent of what we could do rather than necessarily the first step or the seed for something even bigger than that. But in the discussions we've been having, looking at a model that might be relevant not just for our community, but also other communities in Scotland, because across Scotland, because the government strategy is very much looking towards city centres, whereas an awful lot of Scotland is already built and is in communities of our kind of size. So we can find something that works here to support a better cost of heat and decarbonisation, then maybe that can be applied elsewhere. We need more heat. We use about 16 megawatt hours on average per year in each of our properties. That is about twice London. We have more of a heat problem in Scotland. What a surprise. What a surprise. We also have a high proportion of stone-built houses. This is an old community. It's much easier if you're looking to the new estates, the recent build standards to drive heating. But our community has a lot of old properties, which are just an absolute nightmare to consider retrofitting and bringing up to modern build standards and heating effectively. District heating can solve that problem. The Perth and Kinross lease strategy, the energy efficiency strategy, did identify across Perth as a whole that about a third of homes are in fuel poverty, and that rose during the Ukrainian invasion to about 2/3 of homes struggling. It was 60-something%. I can't remember the right number across across the county as a whole, where folks are paying more than 10% of their monthly income on energy costs. So fuel poverty is a real thing, and we have an opportunity to do something about it, and indeed collectively, especially in this forum, an obligation to be doing something about it. Interestingly, when you look at our community, something like £4 million is drained out of it every year in order to heat our homes, in order to heat our properties, and that is, that is just gone. The money is just gone. It goes to overseas shareholders, but also the heat just goes, and the carbon dioxide created from our gas boilers just goes. And of course, that all comes back as a problem later, whether it's as a poverty angle or as a climate change angle. And there's no doubt climate change is here. Anything that we can do to move the climate this decade is a huge amount more powerful than something done next decade. There's a need for action. There's a need for urgency. And a district heating network actually provides an opportunity, rather than going house by house and trying to retrofit and work through this particular building or the next one. It is much straightforward. There is more disruption in the street, but the connection into existing house heating systems is actually very simple. So you can, once you've got pipe in the street, you can decarbonise the whole street very straightforwardly and go street by street through your community. So that's what we've been thinking about, let alone the fact that the lease strategy identifies that the costs of a retrofit first strategy are unsustainable. The current government strategy, putting a heat pump in every home, is just not going to work. It is too expensive and it ties up too much capital. Next slide, please. We've also here got a problem, and that is entirely illuminated by the photograph on the right-hand side, which was taken in November last year. That green bloom is a consequence of the agricultural runoff, predominantly the phosphates, nitrates flowing into the loch, combined with the climate change effects of unusually high temperatures in November. Now, just before that, in back end of September, if you lived in the south of town, it was completely swamped by an amazing stink because an algal bloom had died off and the horrendous smell coming off the loch. This loch is the reason why many people stay in this community. It's the reason we love our environment. That's why people move here. It's an internationally important Ramsar Nature Reserve. That's an international significance. It's the responsibility of all sorts of people, but no one seems to stand up to say, we will actually look after it. What we've identified, and this comes from Denmark and some examples that they've fed into us, is that there is actually a way in order to capture those 15 tons or so of phosphates that end up in the loch each year and do something proactive about the blooms that are going, reduce that impact. Could we have the next slide, please? So our purpose of catch that we've held on to over the years, 4 real headlines. One, it's absolutely about cost of living. If the cost of heat from the network is not lower than gas, we haven't got to the right place. We should keep working and get it there. And there are solutions that's practical as an aim. Secondly, we want to do something about that the runoff problem, about the pollution problem in our beloved nature reserve. We want to decarbonise fast. That should be an imperative on everything that we do, except there seem to be few good ideas to actually move the needle in any reasonable time frame. This is one that could address that, could make a difference. And it's about community wealth. We would like to do this with strong community ownership of the assets involved so that we keep that 4 million flow that goes out to remote shareholders, doing something for the long term that is beneficial for the community. Next slide, please. We have a 3-step plan. First phase, there's I don't know how many people here, I will assume none, have heard of biochar, but if you take wood chip and you heat it to high temperature in the absence of oxygen, it doesn't burn. It creates a carbon structure. It gives off all the flammable light gas components, but you end up with a very solid, stable carbon structure that locks in the CO2 component relating to the real carbon content of the wood chip. Now, that's something that's actually in your John Innes #1. It's a good soil improver if you put that on fields. It helps the structure of the soil and increases agricultural yields. The second thing that's quite interesting about it is within that carbon structure, if you dunk it in a loch that has a high concentration of phosphates, it attracts the phosphates and binds them into the carbon structure so that when you put that on a field, it becomes a slow release fertilizer. So there's an opportunity here to look towards a circular phosphate economy where farmers need to fertilize their fields. They're paying a fortune for that at the moment because fertilizer prices have gone through the roof. That, when it rains, flows down into the loch, causes the pollution problem. If we can extract that promptly, we can then recirculate it back and have less impact in the loch and reduce costs to farmers. The really good news about this is when you create the biochar, not only does it have these saleable product outcomes, the council's paying something like £29 a tonne to dispose of wood chip green waste. So we could consume that, but also when you make the biochar solution, it gives off a shed load of heat. Indeed, at the scale, if we were to target something like 3% of the fields in Kinross-shire, that would generate more than half the heat that the town needs. It's a lot of heat comes out of this process. So you've got a heat source on demand that's doing some real good for the ecology of the loch, the environment of the loch, but also doing real good for the economy of the farmers. And that's why we've got really good interest from Nature Scotland and Forth Rivers Trust and the Lens Leaving Initiative, SSEN, the council involved, the Diageo and such like, those players. But it's a really good source. So if we could have the next slide, please. Some people don't like reading words, so I drew a picture. There's the flow into the loch, about 15 tonnes a year. Biochar locks up CO2 for decades. It's directly beneficial back to the community as a soil improver. It also, when you extract the phosphate, cleans the loch, giving real benefit to the community from the environmental improvements, but also making a reusable, lower cost fertilizer for farms. So there's a nice, strong argument there. Now, at the moment, we haven't done anything about the £4 million a year and the CO2 from gas heat. Could we have the next slide, please? Phase 2 is to look at the heat components that would go alongside the biochar plant to gather that heat and optimize it and make it available to a network. There's infrastructure that needs to be brought there. The logic is centered on a large scale thermal energy store. I believe that the Perth heat network that's been getting HNSU support is one of the critiques of it is that it doesn't have enough storage. That's a very strong logic that's come from Danish experience that we've been linking into. If you have a large scale thermal storage unit, it lets you span from either the demand peak to the demand peak when you look at the weather events that go by, or indeed if you're looking at wind power and energy costs on the grid, you can go from one gale to the next when our national grid is struggling with the amount of energy that is flowing around and can't find good homes for it. So the biochar route gives a good baseload heat to get things going, a useful proportion of the town's requirement, but we are in strong discussion with the energy suppliers, SSEN, but also I was talking with NISO today, Ofgem, the DESNES, the players who are looking at the energy system. If you have a large heat store, but you also have the ability to take power very quickly, i.e. directly from the Milnathorpe primary substation into your plant, you can respond very quickly to the spikes that come from renewables and take advantage of them, because at those times prices can go negative. So you get energy for free if you've got the capital infrastructure that lets you take it quickly enough. And that's in the nature of what we've been modelling. These two basic concepts of the biochar baseload, which has so many ecological benefits, and the fast energy from the grid, where we have things like the Sea Green offshore plant beyond feeding into the grid at Dundee. It's spending most of its time in curtailment. We are paying for that about 1.4 billion, it said yesterday, a year to turn wind farms off across Scotland because we can't cope with the energy provided and we have to turn on a gas plant down south. Now, if we can use that, if we can flex up the demand, they just love it as system providers. And so talking to the guy at Ofgem today at the exhibition in Glasgow, I mean, they're saying as a great idea what you're thinking of. Get together with the council, because the council can lead to go for SIP funding to get half the infrastructure just put in place. And they're looking for these kind of projects. 70% of them get accepted. So just make it, they're really short, good ideas. There's something we could do here to enable it to move forward. Could we have the next slide, please? Oh, I note in there, I mean, that flexibility services for grid balancing and stopping our grid becoming unstable, that's an advantage. But also, if you're going to go through the current government strategy of putting a heat pump in every home, that implies every single substation also needs to be upgraded, because many of them are short of headroom. So again, thinking about pictures, if you take the first part of the story, you link in a strong heat store, that becomes the point where redirecting the money that we spend that just evaporates on our gas bills into building infrastructure, supporting the funding for ongoing infrastructure. That, in essence, is about buying an assets for the community that in due course we own. So after a while, when you paid off the loan, you own the assets and you get significantly cheaper heat because of that.
David, for my benefit, explain to me exactly what a heat store is.
Well, it's actually it's as similar as the hot tank that you've probably got in your house.
Cool.
It's a big body of water that you heat up at 90 degrees.
Okay, that's right.
And the bigger you make it, the better use it is.
Right. Okay.
Simple as that.
Okay.
So that's what we've been talking about. Next slide, please. These are the kind of things, the kind of infrastructure that would make sense in there. Top left, the Meldorf pit store. I mean, basically, you're asking what does the tank look like?
Mm-hmm.
You create a pit in the ground, you line it with the same kind of stuff that you can put at the bottom of municipal waste dumps to catch all the baddies. But here you make it a hot liner, a hot proof liner, something that won't age. And you fill it with water and you put a lid on it, and there's your heat store. The boiler, the e-boiler, 50 megawatt e-boiler, viable entity, it can respond and run up to speed within a minute. So the sun comes out behind a cloud and your solar farm goes into overload, you can respond and help the grid. The grid will pay for that kind of infrastructure. Now, heat pumps, if you do, industrial heat pumps are super more efficient than the kind you can put in your home. You just do it at scale. There are huge economies of scale from doing that. There's an air source heat pump, 12 megawatt one. That's a viable entity. They're well established. Those are the kind of things that would make sense in the text. Next slide, please. And as you start putting those in place, there's a need to start practicing delivering resilient heat. So you start with big anchor loads that have a backup capability until you're good at delivering that. But any heat you provide them is green heat that many of their customers may be asking for. And we have some ideas as to how to make that fly in terms of the rollout plan. Next slide, please. So phase 3 is about expanding. This is the point where it needs quite a lot of money, but this is the point actually where the National Wealth Fund says, oh good, you need lots of money for a sensible project. We'll provide that. We're happy to engage. Actually, Ofgem say the same thing. It's got to be big enough for them to get out of bed to get interested. There's kind of 3 sub-phases that are logical within here. You see that red bit, we mapped every postcode and the demand and what the viability of the network in each street is, because they're not all the same attractiveness. It costs to make a connection. Some areas you move into, they're very well insulated, they lose less heat. Others, you're going into a street of almost like castles. Castles are great for a district heating network because they use lots of heat. They're very good base load consumption and revenue. But that hot spine, the red bit going from Todd and Duncan up to the school and the swimming pool, it's a really good place to start because it picks up many of the anchor loads, and it picks up, it's neatly contained, and actually by any metric, it will work as a heat network. Secondly, if you roll out to some of the older estates, like the Sutherland Drive estate, where that's going to be really hard to get everybody engaged and those build standard insulated, and the more the council owned housing, like the Churchill, Oakview, that's or Montgomery Way. I mean, there are places where there's more support needed for people. That's very relevant in that kind of second phase. It makes sense in that second phase to get to Milnathorpe because there's challenges within Milnathorpe that are relevant to address. To get to the whole town, to bring everybody in, including like the new houses of Acremore Drive, that's a stretch because the further you go, the less economic it becomes. It costs you more for the piping and you don't get the revenue flow. But that balance is something you work towards. If you've got the infrastructure that you own is partially paid off, actually it becomes cheaper to roll out further. So there's a question here about the vision. The slide previously was talking about inclusivity. If you want to make an offer available to the whole community, you set off with that vision to deliver benefit to the whole community. This logic hits all the boxes that you said were in the national transport strategy buttons, and lo and behold, they're in the energy strategy requirement as well. Next slide, please. How do you drive engagement? Actually, you need a lot of people to sign up to this and say, yeah, take our house, just plug in, we'll go that way. Well, actually, fundamentally, you need to show that the cost of heat is better than gas. If you're planning a network where the cost of heat is higher than gas, it's not going to have acceptance. You might find a few council buildings where the mission of the council is to be green, so they pay extra money for that heat. But if you're going to try and connect houses, it's got to be lower than gas. There's no point in having a target higher than that. Now, temporarily, we've got a blip, so it makes the economics of that look really attractive. But normally that's about 6p-ish. It's got to be that kind of level. We spent a lot of time looking at the makeup of the stack of capex components and fuel cost components to get that to work, and that's what we're largely understanding. The burden of sign up. You don't want to be ripping the house apart to make the change. You want to make it easy. You don't want to have a huge capital expenditure up front that's saying, if you've got 10,000 of capital, then you can join the scheme. It's got to be easy. We need some good demonstration early of the benefits so that the over the garden wall conversations can go on, driving more engagement. We are absolutely thinking here, very Danish inspired, that this should be done as a not-for-profit logic. In other words, the primary drivers are to deliver the lowest possible cost of heat to the community to maximise the benefit for the community, rather than maximising the benefit for some remote shareholders. Simple as that. Driving community wealth, so having an ownership, a clear ownership rationale makes sense. Next slide, please. Where are we at the moment? We're at the
David, have we got much to?
And I think that there's only about two slides to go. Yeah. The current status is we're looking to establish a community-owned community benefit society with potentially a charitable wrapper to look after the ecological side of things, the environmental things. We've got good engagement with a lot of the Loch stakeholder type players. We're included in LEAS and the Community Action Plan, Place Plan. We're working on getting the financial model and starting the discussions with funders who can help this to happen. Next slide, please. And there's a nice looking brochure. Where do we want to do it? We've had discussions with states about this bit of council-owned land, looking at how those assets could fit into the space just at the motorway junction. And that looks good, looks interesting. The adjacent plots, brown fields here, are owned by Miller Developments, I think it is, or Miller Homes. And there's an interesting potential discussion there to bring them in to do something useful. So we need to have that discussion to go exploring. The way that you get the heat through from the motorway to the town, looking at that culvert, which definitely, that's big and it's interesting, and or we try something else. Okay, so lovely to have a nice discussion with you. Yeah. Next slide, please. What are we asking for? Why are we here? Sorry, that went on too. Slide before that, please. We would like the council to engage more. We would like more discussion, more exploration, more engagement, more support. We're started discussions about land. We want to move forward with discussions with land. And becoming a thing is an important milestone. Becoming a thing with access to land is another important milestone that just builds credibility. Becoming a thing with a land and a good plan and funding is obviously the next, the stage after that. There are lots of funding options available. There's much better funding options available if we do it in conjunction with the council, because that enables public infrastructure funding at very low rates for public benefit to become available. And there's oodles of those that we could go for. Next slide, please. Last slide, please. I've been tracking what's happening to our climate for quite a while. It's interesting. I mean, 2015 was pretty well, the Paris Agreement was on the left-hand edge of this. These are different CO2 monitoring around the world. All the discussion, all the target setting have actually delivered nothing in terms of bending the trajectory. We need to do something. We need to act. Like your help to do it.
David, thanks very much. Open up to questions.
Yeah, I've got one actually. It's an observation. I'm interested to know how a community-owned community benefit scheme like this can benefit from an association with a land developer who actually wants to build houses or whatever. How does that work? What are they hoping for from that?
We're not necessarily saying anything about that. They have a right to that land, but the land is not allocated for housing. So they don't have a sense of what the purpose would be. They're just kind of holding the land. Now, whether that's they might sell it to us, they might rent it to us, they might have a discussion and do something in order to win somewhere else. You know, it's worth having the discussion, but we don't actually need it for a lot of the starting points here. The council owned land, the old marshalling lands from the time the railway was here. It's railway build or motorway builders.
I thought it was in motorway.
I mean,
it's great when they were building.
It's been council owned for a long time and absolutely nothing has happened on it.
It's not criticism, by the way. I think it's a great scheme. Just was curious to know how they would.
Don't know. We haven't had any discussion to see what the possibilities are yet.
Yeah, my question is more for officers. You asked for more engagement. I'm just really wondering who would be the right person or group at the council to engage with.
Numerous.
It crosses a number of things.
LDP, economic development, it could be involved at some point.
I know I've already
Climate
started.
change.
I assume flooding's coming into this as
Yeah, down in that bit, yes.
So the
flooding
question
is
I'm happy to take it away.
could you kick
is
out?
it possible to coordinate it with
Yeah, it probably sits better with somebody in the climate
I was
change
gonna say,
team,
I
but I'm
well
happy to take that to them and see.
With Pete Leonard already, or?
Oh, are you already
Yeah.
in touch with Pete?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
Pete's far better contact,
Aye.
or is the best contact, but I will tell Pete
That may
about
need
this
some-
explanation.
And my second
Yeah,
question
I'll do that.
is, how do we get more emphasis on Kinross's solution rather than Perth's? It's always Perth. They always get something from us. So
Here's a good idea. This is what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do, is to get this up. It's in the LP strategy. It's there. It's trying to get the resources, to put more resources from the council perspective to start taking this forward. I think Richard need to get, something with Steve to see if this works, which I will obviously need a bit of Rick's input as well on that from that perspective.
We've been to the site together and looked at it, and had previously been looking at the land to do enabling works for more employment land, but we've had discussion about that, Nicola, about you putting employment land on the opposite side of the motorway. The preference would be not to do that, so that it does free up, that area of
This will
land.
generate jobs.
But there are other stakeholders involved with, because we've got the depot and AMI are, doing a ground lease there, so they'll need to be coming into the mix for that. Yeah.
I think all we can ask as a committee is that get these discussions, speeded up a wee bit to make sure it's a full part of us. And I think with the if there is more funding coming out, I know there's a lot of releases with Scottish Government going out just now that were held back on potential funding. I think it's important that we have that local, that community level project that's sitting at a decent level, and all the resources are not just going into the Perth one. Again, I get that's important as well, but I think it's just that community wealth thing. I think something that appeals to a lot of people, and so as I take it from this committee's perspective.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other observations? Really?
I think it would be quite good if we could actually get progress reports on this, because clearly you and your team have done a hell of a lot of work on this, and given the clear benefits that would be for everybody, I think it'd be quite good if we actually just kept it moving forward. These things can often just be put in a siding somewhere, and it never goes anywhere. So that's the last thing in the world I think we all want.
One of the things in council trying to push as part of the climate change committee is we don't really have any district heat system. Fife has quite a few, Aberdeen has a few, Edinburgh has a few, and there's quite a lot of councils that have moved forward on this, but for some reason we've struggled to generate that future vision with it all. And members of this committee are interested, because what I'm going to try and do, or what I've started to try and do, is actually get a visit to some of these other district heat systems. Now, this may have a different component from the energy side that's plugging into it, but once you've got the network, you can start plugging up anything in that can generate heat to create heat. And then if you've got to change something, it's easier changed at source rather than every house having to change a heat system. And I'm quite happy I could, if people in the committee were interested in visiting one, could have a chat with Fife or something like that and have a look at one of their ones and go and visit and see how it works. And it gives a community perspective. I think that might be quite beneficial. I felt from a committee perspective it would be helpful in Perth to get more political side, understand a bit more how they work and how they can work, and the benefits that come out of them. And certainly from this committee's perspective, there's a will to do that. Certainly happily take that forward.
Yeah, we can discuss that up. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. Yes. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to leave as well. I think this would be fine.
It's about 15 minutes. Maybe I should start.
I don't want to hold anybody back. I'm conscious we've got quite a few offices here. Does anyone have to get away soon, or are you happy to stay on till 7 on? I mean, we've mainly focused on community stuff, but I thought it was important that you heard what's being said, because it's kind of getting across to officers what we're doing there as well. So if we move on then, the next item on the agenda is the update on LDP. Going to do that, Nicola?
Yeah, I can probably cut a few bits out if that would be helpful.
I think so. We've only got 40 minutes.
Hopefully not cut out the main bits, but
I mean, I think it's the effect on the community councils, the placed plans.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're at a point where there's a lot of work going on, but there's nothing to show at this point necessarily. So it'll be me coming back to future meetings when we've made decisions, and we're definitely not at a point of having made decisions. So I think some of you probably would have been involved in the big place conversation that happened in 2023 that started to shape the new LDP, which is LDP 3. It just follows on from LDP 2. So with that and all of the studies, all of the information that we've been gathered, we created an evidence report, and it's kind of like a gate check effectively. We submit that to Scottish Government and they tell us whether that's sufficient information to be able to move on to the next stage. They came back and said it wasn't. They wanted some further information, very specifically around school capacities. So not in any particular location, just the general across Perth and Kinross, in terms of how the impact of the growth would affect school capacities. So we worked with our education colleagues. We took the evidence report back to full council in December, and we resubmitted that in February this year. We've not heard anything from them on that specific point, but we were asked a question around the updated household projections that came off the 2022 census, and just whether that would change our housing figure. Yes, it's likely to, but we don't need to do anything at this point. We'd already accepted that as you work towards the proposed plan, you make changes. It's not an absolute set in stone piece of evidence. So as of today, we're sitting and waiting. Unfortunately, we're not in control with Scottish Government, with a reporter. We know who the reporter is. We believe he's working to the 2nd of June. That's the latest update. But until that moves forward, we're able to carry on with lots of information. We're not just sat doing nothing. We can carry on with lots and lots of work that take us to a point. What we can't do until we get the evidence report back is move on with the proposed plan. So that's the point that would become the real sticking point for us. If we get something back on the 2nd of June, we're absolutely fine and we can carry on. We have very recently updated our timeline, and that's around the proposed plan, but that's more just because of the timescales it takes us for reports and getting to committee also than the work that needs to be done at this point. So just a few things. We've looked at locality profiles, 20-minute neighbourhoods. We'll be looking through greenbelt reviews, transport assessments that we've talked about, open space audits. We've updated the retail study, partway through the housing needs and demand assessment, and then lots of the environmental assessments. That's just a minor list of the things that we have to pull together. Most interest probably is the call for sites. We ran that through. We had 260 sites across the whole of Perth and Kinross, and their proposals from landowners, house builders, planning agents, and some from community groups, mainly because they want to see it for housing, employment, mixed use, or there are 2 or 3 that are for open space that have come through from community groups as well. We're midway through assessing all of those. That's pretty much what the team are working on at the minute, is assessing those, and every site is assessed regardless of what we may think of that site. We assess it, it's robust, it will be transparent, all of that will be published. The call for sites have been published as well, so you can see those on the website. Obviously we've received quite a number of sites across Kinross-shire. Most of them will be, the only one that's been resubmitted, if you like, is the housing site, which is the reference H50. That's been resubmitted, but that hadn't come forward, so that's not a great surprise. All the others will be.
Sorry, which is H50?
H50.
I know H46, but H50.
Second. H50 is Old Perth Road, or that's how we describe it, Old Perth Road.
Okay.
We've had planning permission for 32, but it's not been started, so call for site has come in. So the others are new in the sense that they're not allocated, but I'm sure plenty of them have been seen before through LDP2, LDP1. And then
I think the vast majority of the LDP2 housing sites have been developed, in the process of being developed.
yes, it's all bar one.
All bar one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's quite unusual for the rest of Perth and Kinross, isn't it? Housing market area.
Yeah, probably. You'll always have. It's the way development.
Yeah.
Whilst it seems strange that a house builder will go to the effort of a call for sites, put in a plan and permission, it's not always the case that that site then comes forward for development. Just in terms of ability to comment, what we will be doing from June onwards, no set dates at this point, is putting information online about the spatial strategy, the approaches to local policy settlement boundaries, so that will be available to comment on. And then once we've made a decision on the sites, spatial strategy, moving on to the sites, we'll have some place-based discussions, but more specifically in the areas where we're suggesting there's growth. But absolutely no decisions at this point in terms of where the growth will be. Then we'll move on to the proposed plan, and that will be a 3-month consultation period. So once that proposed plan comes out, there's 3 months, and obviously we'll be contacting community councils, as we have done in the past around that. It's probably it. I've tried to miss out a few bits there.
Okay, that's really the first question.
Okay, that's been really helpful. I think people in Kinross-shire feel that we've had a huge number of houses that were allocated in LDP2. And in fact, there was far more houses built in following LDP2 than was allocated. So do you take into account the huge rise in our population when it comes to forward calculations? Maybe just people say to me they want a chance for services and things to catch up with the rapid rise in house numbers. How much do you take that into account when you're deciding what's going to be in the plan?
No, definitely. It's quite a big part of our conversations going forward, because it's not just in Kinross-shire as you would expect.
I think Kinross-shire is the one part of Perth Kinross has had the most rapid increase in population as a percentage, isn't it?
I don't have the exact figures, but I suspect the likes of Octorada and others would argue a similar way as well.
It is indeed.
It's doubled in the last 40 years.
Yeah. So,
but the point being, we're conscious of that in lots of places across Perth and Kinross. There have been quite significant levels of growth. Some of that hasn't come forward, and yes, we're conscious of that going forward. However, we have to deliver on a certain level of housing. We are very keen that there's a bit more rural housing. That's something that we're hearing from across members, just as a general point. So we're looking at that. But what you can't get with rural areas is large allocations. So you end up with lots of small allocations. So you can still get to a point. We're also mindful that Perth has seen quite a bit of growth as well, and some of that hasn't come forward. Perth is a city, so we're not saying no growth, but just being mindful of everything that's come forward there as well. So the spatial strategy is key. So yes, we take account of that growth. We need to decide on the spatial strategy going forward. And then I think part of your second point is also around density on sites as well. So in terms of what the numbers would be against each policy, and yeah, we're mindful of that. And historically, data will always help us because that helps us with the calculations. But for an allocation, we can only make a calculation based on what we're assuming, because we don't have full levels of detail at the point of allocation. But yeah, we're aware of it.
Right. Okay. Richard, you want to add?
You mentioned, cutting through quite quickly with the very briefly about the retail requirement
Yeah.
update. From a Kinross perspective, does that change the goalposts on having something in there from a retail perspective?
No, but
From Kinross, or is it still, you know, if you do it outside the town centre, it's going to be exceptionally challenging?
yeah, so I mean, MPF 4, obviously 22 will still apply, but the retail study was an update. But what it's showing us is that anywhere in Perth and Kinross, we don't need to be allocating further retail. So that's something. I mean, it's all online. I'm happy to have a separate conversation because I know that we've spoken about that before. Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, as a general point, no, it's not something that we're looking at in most places across Perth and Kinross, any new retail.
We'll discuss that later offline.
Can I ask, how does that fit in with what was the BCA site? How do you view that in that case? Is that still retail stroke industrial? Or
At the minute, yes, but that's a decision clearly we need to look at and take going forward. In terms of the site at the minute, and it will come on to the flood risk element of it as well. We need to be mindful of that. It will depend on the scheme as to whether we could change that. But we're conscious of local views around that site. But it's a site we would like to see developed in some way. And clearly there is an interest in it being housing, which I think that's a great surprise.
the only observation I make on that is the fact it's also potential employment, which once it goes, will not come back.
Absolutely,
So it's
absolutely, and it was noted before. We've spent quite a few hours going through all areas, looking at employment sites, trying to establish, you know, those that have been developed, fine, but those that haven't been developed, are they still worth keeping as allocations? Is there still that demand? And we're very conscious in Kinross that there is still demand, and you're absolutely right. Once lost, you don't get that back.
Right. I think we're going to come to that anyway in a minute. So.
okay. All right.
Okay. There is a question on the chat. It says, I have a question about the settlement boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Are you anticipating moving any local boundaries, especially with regard to the 20-minute community?
Yes, it's possible, and settlement boundaries would be changed where we were making allocations. So if we made an allocation, we'd clearly include that within the settlement boundary. We wouldn't be making changes for change's sake, but if there are particular locations where the boundary isn't right, and sometimes that can happen in LDP2, then we could look to that. So if there was something in particular, by all means flag it through to me and we can have a look at it.
Okay. Hope that answers the question.
No, not particularly. I think it's incredibly important that when we're thinking about development in Kinross-shire in general and Kinross in particular, that all the proposed sites are more than 20 minutes from the town centre walking, and so therefore should be excluded for that reason alone, apart from the fact it's prime agricultural land. Moving the settlement boundaries doesn't change that, but you know, the report has already moved the boundary once. I assume there's no regard for moving that again. Yeah, there's a very strong community feeling that, quite frankly, the settlement boundary is fine where it is. Thank you very much. And it's about time development was slightly somewhere else. But yeah, I look forward to an interesting conversation and debate moving forward when it comes to housing in Kinross-shire and in particular Kinross.
Thank you, David. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? No? Okay, so we'll move on. If you want to stay till we've had this sort of state side of things.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay through.
Then
That's fine.
we'll be free to go. If you want to come in at this point. I mean, basically, we've got Kinross West. I think the final site's getting developed.
Yeah,
basically. So if you want to explain that.
I'll do a slide.
Okay.
So share it myself.
I think Audrey, can you put the slides up? Or Magda? You shared them with them.
Yeah.
All right.
You just give us a second.
Yeah, no problem.
Maybe the size of the images I've put on it's probably too big. Here we are. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to present today. Time this is about 8 minutes, so
well, short of the
So this presentation is to show the progress and the strategic case for CPIP, which is the Commercial Property and Investment Programme. I'll focus on Kinross West Business Park and its supporting economic growth. Next slide, please. The purpose today is to explain why Kinross West Business Park is strategically important. This aligns the wider ambition of creating Perth and Kinross where everyone can live well and access economic opportunity. I'll outline the case for intervention and what's been delivered so far and what's happening next. Next slide, please. The programme is based on targeted public sector intervention where the market alone cannot deliver. Kinross West is being delivered in phases driven by real market demand. There's clear demand for modern business space, but viability constraints limit private development. Our role is to unlock that demand and translate it into jobs, growth and long-term resilience. Next slide, please. I'll move on to market context, which underpins the need for intervention. It's critical in understanding the programme. Next slide. Okay. There's strong demand but very limited supply of modern business space in Kinross. Most existing units are older and don't meet current business needs. Small to medium enterprises and particularly look for small flexible units under 5,000 square foot. High building costs, modest rents mean private developers can't make schemes viable. This creates a market gap, justifying public sector involvement. Next slide, please. So CPIP response. The Commercial Property Investment Programme is our response to this issue, focusing on enabling development rather than competing with the private sector. Next slide, please. CPIP works by reducing risk of the upfront costs through infrastructure provision. That would include roads, servicing and ready to develop plots. The programme is SME focused, flexible and phased based on demand. Importantly, it ensures that the public investment delivers outcomes like jobs, business retention and resilience. Next slide. I'll highlight what we've already delivered so far at Kinross West and demonstrate the effectiveness of this approach. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of Kinross West, looking southwards down the M90. Started this in 2015, enabling infrastructure for the service land, creating 5 plots. So now we have sites 1, 2 and 3. They've all been sold and developed. And site 5, which you'll notice that one is in the very last stages of completion. We've got certificate of practical completion in the last couple of weeks, so they're up and running as well now. So this has helped build investor confidence in the area and momentum. Next slide, please. So looking closer into these sites, this is site 1. That's a good example of local business growth. AJ Spence, who are based in Milnathorpe, just now a very cramped site. They're needing to expand, so and built a purpose-built facility. This included private investment, creating new jobs, including apprenticeships. It shows how providing the right space enables local businesses to stay. Next slide, please. This is site 5 that I've just been talking about. This is investment from AM Agri, which is Alan Mackay Agricultural. So they've established this new development with a new base in Perth and Kinross, bringing new employment opportunities and reinforcing market confidence. And it highlights Kinross as an attractive business location. Next slide, please. So this is my development for Perth and Kinross. Site 4, we did have it on the market before, but there's a few burdens with the site which has made it unattractive, and one of which was the flooding at the moment is still shown on the top side of that plan, as you can see, which is on the east. And we've also got we've got a drainage whaley for some of the other plots there. So we looked at this as an opportunity to put on our new units ourselves, and we'll keep it as an asset and lease it out to small businesses. So next slide, please. Good. Site 4, this is, you've got a plan and elevation for an example of it. These are 6 flexible units. You're seeing the first 3 sets are in 2 pairs. And they total 7,500 square feet, so each unit's 1,250. They're a basic shell, but they can be split into, they can be opened up into 2 to 3 units if we have a company that's looking for a larger area of space to use. So the design team have procured them. They're local professional consultants which have helped me through to get planning permission. We've got a couple of queries left with building control and we're ready to go. So
that's good.
Yep. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll give you a quick a brief cover of the programme and the delivery timeline. So next slide, please. You'll not be able to read that, but I've got a summary on the side here. So the planning consent that was secured in January. Building warrants progressing as we speak. Procurement's underway with a framework called SCAPE. So although it will be a large contractor that will lead the project, we can set the local supply and the local spend, which is on the project, and I can get a list of the subcontractors that they're going to use to have a look at how that's been allocated.
When's it going to be done?
Well, that's they're due to start August with a completion second quarter 2027, the next year. So it's a 46-week construction timeline. So all goes well. Apart from the burdens that we know on the site, there shouldn't be anything. It's a greenfield site. Fingers crossed in that sense. If we want to move on to the next slide. Because we're using a framework contractor, we can take advantage of the social value targets that come with this, and we'll be making sure that they do that. So we've got these targets that we'll set for them to achieve as the project goes on. So the social values are a key part of the delivery. Local employment, apprenticeships, training opportunities, and engagement with the local suppliers and small to medium enterprises. The aim is to maximise the benefits for the local community and the economy. Next slide. I'll summarise the strategic outcomes. So the programme clearly demonstrates the progression from market gap to economic growth. Public investments unlock development and attracted private sector commitment. New units will increase the supply, support business expansion, create more job opportunities. Overall, this strengthens the economic resilience and confidence in Kinross as a business location. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Yes, Molly.
I think it's really good what you've done in West Kinross, and because we're talking about modern travel, most people can actually walk or cycle to these units and to that work, which is really good. I was going to ask, in other parts of the country, small places like villages have got small, like commercial sites. I know Blair Athol has, for example, quite a small village. Is there anything, and this is part of your work as well, any thoughts to give places like in Fossaway, Glenfarg, just a small commercial area that local businesses can move into and keep jobs in rural communities?
Yeah, if we can find these sites, then we'll look at enabling that. This is an example of it, Kinross being one of the larger settlements in Perth Kinross, and Blairgowrie is going to get a very similar, portfolio of units going in there. But when we're looking at the smaller areas, we're reducing that down to 1 to 2 units. So if the land's available, and we're not being held to ransom for it, then that's the idea. We'll go for get these bigger settlements, enable businesses to move in there, and then we'll look at the other attachments as well.
So community councils in these areas throughout Kinross-shire know of land that they think could be used for that purpose as part of LDP3. That's something that they could bring forward.
Yeah, that's what CPIP's there for. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Richard?
And I think it's a great example. Great to see this coming forward and splitting up into the small 6 units for smaller businesses. From a energy perspective, is there any renewables or anything like that with the sites that will just make them more attractive for small businesses?
Yeah. In comparison to what a private developer will do, that they're much more advanced. What you'd see, there's air source heat pumps and PV panels externally. But the actual rating, we're not aiming for passive house standard, because for an industrial unit, I think everybody would have, the reaction that you have there. But we're still aiming high. So when these are done, they'll have the top level for an EPC.
Which is great, because that allows businesses that are starting up in them or whatever to be more sustainable. Because there's less costs on energy.
Good. I'm a great fan of CPIP. I was pleased to see extra money going into it. My own view is we need more in Kinross-shire. The more the better, basically. That includes an LDP3. I think we need to try and zone some areas for, as you say, in the rural community, Kinross and Milnathort as well, because we've got the population growth and the demand's clearly there. So it's a matter of
so that's part of the conversation.
Yes, I mean, even from my report was about market analysis, but we have had that backed up with a lot of demand. Yeah, we've got.
That's good. Okay, well, I think we need to move on.
Very quickly, is it CPIP? I don't quite know what it is. Is it public-private?
No,
is it public?
Council.
It's council.
Yeah. So we have a capital fund where this is all being spent from. The sites that showed you where we've got Jay Spence and Alan Mackay, they're private companies which have bought the land, and the money from that comes back into CPIP as a recycling mechanism. It's not going to completely pay back over time. CPIP will go down just because if we're making a profit from it, then everybody would be doing it. Private investors would be doing that. So we'll do what we can with the money that we've got, and when we get down the 10-year programme that we have, we have to reassess and see if we need to get more investment back in.
Okay, okay, I think we need to move on because we are running out of time. Feel free to leave if you want. You've done your bit. I'm very conscious that we've got Rory, Rick, and Matt online waiting.
Rory's here.
Yeah, I know Rory, Matt, and Matt's online. Rory and Rick are here. So do you want to lead on this one?
I'll be on.
We're on the South Kinross flood.
Rory, are you leading or Rick? Are you?
I'll
go for it.
Want me to take it away?
Sorry for the delay.
That's all right, not a problem. I'll keep this very brief because it is a bit of a whistle-stop tour over the last couple of years. So since my last, it probably was about a year and a half ago since I last reported to committee, we completed the outline design towards the end of 2023 and formally published the scheme in March of 2024, to which we received 2 valid objections during that publication period. We engaged obviously in several rounds of discussion with both landowners, but unfortunately we couldn't find a resolution to facilitate a withdrawal of their objections. So we then went to Council Committee in December 2024, seeking preliminary confirmation of the scheme, and that then allowed us to inform Scottish Minister of our decision to confirm the scheme. They decided not to call the scheme in terms of the objections for consideration, and therefore we were obliged to hold a local authority hearing to hear both the objectors and satisfy their objections. The hearing was chaired by an independent reporter provided by the DPEA section of the Scottish Government to obviously maintain transparency and fairness for all parties, and that was held over a 3-day period spanning 28th and 29th of October 2025, and then a final session on the 3rd of February 2026. Representation was heard from both objectors along with council officers and our consultant engineers, RPS Tetra Tech. Recordings of the hearings and of the sessions and a copy of the reporter's recommendation report is on the council's website, or the scheme website I should say, if you want to torture yourself to watch it, but it is about 6 hours in total, so I'd set aside each session.
Yeah, so I'd
15 hours of time.
I know, I've watched some. Did you? Well, it's I lived it, unfortunately. But after a period of deliberation, the reporter obviously provided his recommendation report on the 12th of March 2026, which thankfully recommended that the South Kinross flood prevention scheme should be confirmed without modification. So that kind of brings us up to present day. We're currently in discussions with both landowners in terms of how the scheme will fit around their business operations and mitigating access, etc., because that's the one stumbling block at the moment that particularly, well, in both cases, it cuts off access to parts of both of their land. So we'll have to engage in discussions with them to try and find a suitable solution to that. But the intention is to finalise the outline design with these sort of slight changes in it and confirm at council in September of this year. We will then progress the detailed design to completion, which is scheduled for around the end of January 2027. We will then procure a contractor, which will be through the SCAPE framework as well, and likely to be Balfour Beatty, who we're just starting engagement with at the moment. We've had early contractor engagement through the outline design, but we're now actually trying to get them involved as we move to detailed design and sort of put the meat on the bones, so to speak, of the design. And we anticipate, all being well, that construction will commence in the middle of next year, sort of June, July time, and that will take around 12 months to complete, and we should have a complete scheme, all being well, by the middle of 2028.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, and there was mention earlier about the BCA site.
Yes.
What is the implications of that in terms of the flood defences? Will it protect that, and will it mean that that can be developed?
So the principle of a flood scheme is not to enable development.
Yeah,
that's enshrined in MPF4 and the legislation. So the reality is, what happens with the BCA site does not necessarily form part of the assessment for the scheme, and whether it happens there or not, either development type, whether it's commercial, residential, doesn't really matter as far as the scheme is concerned. The scheme is being
designed to deliver, actually to deliver the MPF4 policy 22 threshold of protection. That's not to enable development, that's just as a byproduct of the design. So we have fielded questions from various interested parties over the last 18 months or so,
At least, yeah.
In a non-preferential manner, because we're not here to enable their development.
How does that work with LDP, given that the site's already zoned and policy 22's avoidance as first step? Not LDP.
MPF4 policy 22 is avoidance principle first, yes. But obviously the scheme is there for the community as a whole, which will, by dint of its location, afford protection to the PCA site.
When you've got the, keen to see that brownfield site developed.
Yeah.
But you've got avoidance being the first principle of flooding.
The advice we've provided along the way is we will recommend refusal for any application that comes forward before the scheme is complete. Once the scheme is complete,
application come forward, not the. But you're not going to guess what the results are until the scheme's been developed.
What do you mean by guess the results?
Like Scone they said no development till a committed crossing over the Tay, that kind of once we decided to build a bridge over the River Tay, Destiny Bridge, development could start in Scone. And it's that principle that are you saying that you there's from a flooding perspective you wouldn't
right now before the scheme is complete, so not started but complete, we will recommend objection to any
and once the scheme's complete, delivered,
yes,
complete, then you will reassess whether it's suitable or it's not.
Well, the principle is that the scheme will provide the necessary protection, at which point it is not needing a new scheme. It doesn't trip over policy 22.
I mean, from a plan, yeah. Right, okay. So you're saying the scheme will remove that site out of the policy 22 criteria, so use will not.
We'll assess it as we would do normally, just for playing with a straight bat. But the principle is that right now we would object because it's at risk of flooding. Once the scheme is in place, that risk is mitigated, so we wouldn't have the same automatic response of recommend refusal. We'll go through the motions because obviously there are subtleties for each application type.
Thank you.
The flood prevention scheme in Milnathort made a huge difference, and it's transformed the centre of the village and given many people who were suffered with flooding peace of mind that during periods of bad weather. Can I ask you about the South Creek? Now, the South Creek is clearly, especially getting near the loch, is changing its course and eroding the banks and stuff. How do you cope with that with a flood prevention scheme? Because it's very difficult to control where a water course goes. Is that going to be a problem going forward?
I mean, I think the areas you're talking about are downstream of Todd and Duncan.
Correct.
The scheme actually finishes at the extent of Todd and Duncan.
Okay.
So the actual scheme extents finish at the end of the old BCA car park, sort of wrap around up into the nature reserve. And then there's a embankment that ties into the flood wall that will wrap around Todd and Duncan. Everything after that is straight into the nature reserve.
Okay.
So you obviously come across problems if you're trying to construct anything with concrete in a triple SI. So and obviously there's no receptors beyond that would require protection. So the only receptors beyond that would be your nature reserve buildings, Scottish, SNH and the boathouse and whatnot, but they're receiving their own individual property level protection, i.e. floodgates and air brick covers, etc., to protect them from the loch. But
because the Heritage Trail Bridge was getting undermined.
Yes.
So once work's complete, that should be safe enough.
Well, that's downstream of the works.
Oh,
so
right.
that would still be a separate issue that Green Space and tracks, I think, that manage it, we'd have to obviously look into. But yeah, unfortunately, we can't fix that for them.
We've still got ongoing conversations as well with Scottish Water for their pump station down that bit of the world as well, because obviously that's right next door to the bridge that's got undermined. They've got a pipe bridge right next door to it, and the stability of that area in general. But that's the Scottish Water pieces because it is, immediately adjacent to the scheme itself. The bridge and that general area is downstream, as Rory says, and we wouldn't look to step in because there are no receptors. We're not going to stabilise a natural watercourse.
Okay.
We'd rather it does what it does.
That's clarified it for me, thank you.
One of the earlier discussions that were heard is there was potential discussion with Todd and Duncan to get some of their land to actually widen the river so that the fences didn't have to be so high. Is that been scrapped, that idea, or is it still? They're still discussing?
No, we're still in quite close discussions with Todd and Duncan, because obviously their redevelopment plan is pulling the building slightly back from the watercourse, but they're not redeveloping the whole site. So while we'd have it would be more of a bit more room to work in rather than actually realigning the wall alignment. I think the wall alignment is going to be the height now, because moving it back a couple of meters wouldn't actually do much to the actual wall height. So yeah,
I was just wondering if that was a kind of consequential with what Willie brought up there. If you widen it further upstream, narrowing it again then would create a problem. I was just wondering.
Yeah, it's, I mean that would be the downstream extent anyway, where you would potentially be getting a little bit of betterment in terms of construction room. So if it wouldn't have any sort of detrimental effect, right, on a wide scale.
Just one thing, David West put a thing up saying he would like Kinross Community Council would like copies of correspondence. Did you want to clarify that, David? Which correspondence?
Oh, am I live? Hopefully, yes. It was he mentioned correspondence between the council and a potential developer down there. Did you hear that?
Yes, we did hear that. I'd have to ask what's possible to be shared, to be honest. Yeah, because it is a commercially sensitive discussion. It's part of their potential development ideas, but I will make some inquiries and then come back to you.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Any other questions on the?
It's good though.
Rory, thanks for coming along and thanks for all the work behind the scenes that's gone on into this. And I think the timescales are that's better than I thought from a timescale perspective, because you've already done a lot of the boreholes and the soil testing, haven't you?
Yeah, all the ground investigation and topographical surveys are done now. So
you can just get moving.
Yeah, the intrusive sort of information is now.
And we're looking at this coming before full council September, and then that's the green light just to go.
Yeah, that
need to go back to Scottish Government to get okay.
Well, the confirmation in September closes out the local authority hearing stage. So we've already reported to government that that's a marker that we're using. There are various COSLA type papers that have gone before this, which set out various situations, one of them being 3 local authorities, each with a scheme, that have gone to public local inquiry or local authority hearing, and what that means relative to getting a construction contract in place, which should have been done in March this year. Now, we haven't been able to do that because we're in the hearing stage. So the marker at the end gives a start of the hearing to end of the hearing timeframe that government consider to give us back time to progress with the detailed design and all the legislative gateways that we have to go through. There are still hurdles. It is not a foregone conclusion, but that is our happy path timeline to construction. So I would love to say, yes, it's a completely done deal. We're going to be building this scheme, no problem at all. That's the timeline. But there are still some challenges and hurdles to be met and overcome, both from a design and an objector's perspective, and also the conversation with Scottish Government in whatever guise it is this week and going forward, to do with that central funding opportunity. So we'll be explaining that along the way through the right channels. But we're getting there. We've got past the hearing, which is a big step.
Thank you very much, and apologies, Dave, for extending that.
That's all right. We're now in overtime. You're welcome to stay, guys, but you can also go. It's up to you. We've only got one more item to go.
Apologies.
No, you carry on. That's fine. We're past 7 o'clock anyway. The last item really is road safety and active travel. Matthew's just messaged me to say that he's got a written summary of all the points. I'm just going to go through it because it includes both active travel and road safety, and he's got it fed in by the other members. Are you happy to get a written summary after this and we can send it out to everybody? I wanted to make a presentation now.
I'm quite happy for it, just to get a summary. Okay. But I think as councillors, we all got contacted by residents of Montgomery Street.
I was going to raise that.
So I think it's important we actually, if we can have a slight discussion about anything that can be done about that.
Yeah, happy with that. Okay, Matthew, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Been sitting patient.
Okay?
Yeah, I think what he's saying is that I think we're happy to have the written summary.
Yeah.
But we wanted to raise the question of Montgomery Street. We've had effectively it's a petition from residents who are keen to see some speed mitigation measures put into Montgomery Street. Okay. And I think it's a question of asking if we can have officer input on that proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can undertake some speed monitoring survey, determine if it is a speeding issue there, and then we can offer to meet the residents on site as well and discuss any possible solutions. Yeah, it's no problem.
You happy with that?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Matthew, it's maybe just me, but since the new 20-mile-an-hour limits have come in, I've had far more complaints about speeding than ever before.
We did warn Police Scotland about this and Transport Scotland about this before we installed this. We knew the Police Scotland's stance was that they weren't going to routinely enforce 20-mile-per-hour as well as they do the 30s. We warned them about this, and we put extra enforcement resources on and pressures on Police Scotland. Obviously, because the speed's lower, the compliance is poorer in certain aspects. So yes, we know them issues. We warned Transport Scotland, and not just us, local authorities did as well across the board before this went ahead, that we would have this issue.
Okay, Darryl McEwen, the council's senior road safety engineer, said at a meeting a while back, he once said that reaching the speed limit doesn't work unless you put the actual infrastructure in to make people slow down.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we're going to have to look at as a council and actually allocate money to put safety measures into streets that are a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awkward one because like we usually lower speed limits for urban environments, especially for 20s. For 20s especially, you want it to feel like a 20 environment, not like frontage development both sides, tight roads, that kind of stuff. It kind of lends itself to a lower speed limit. When it's kind of a mixed bag, it's kind of down to traffic car. It can be down to traffic car measures. A lot of it is down to driver behaviour as well. We did ask Transport Scotland at the start of this project, like, will you be providing funding for potential traffic car measures if we don't get the speeds down to 20 or around 20 mile per hour? We are yet to hear about that, and we didn't hear about that. So you can petition Transport Scotland as well regarding that, because it's a huge funding, it's a huge area, and to get compliance all across PKC for 20 mile per hour would be a huge infrastructure and a huge cost to the council as well. So we did ask Transport Scotland about that, but they didn't specify.
How long ago is it since you asked them?
Oh, it was at the start, so probably before we got the first lot of funding, so maybe March last year. Probably even before that, actually, when the consultation and this kind of all started up, which is kind of before my time. So
is it possible, through you, convener, is it possible for you to send your contact details at Transport Scotland on this to the convener? I think we as a committee should write to Transport Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you should. We did raise concerns that we can put these 20s in, but there's no guarantee you'll get compliance. And we weren't not just us, all across Scotland did warn them about this. So yeah, I can pass them contact details onto yourselves, and I can also get in touch with Transport Scott and ask any update on this.
Right, I think
Okay.
Margaret's got a question.
I was just going to add to that Darryl McEwen also said that when speed limits come in, unless there's an obvious reason for them,
Yeah,
people are going to abide by them. And certainly in my
Yeah.
community, there's a long stretch of road that is now come down from 40 to 30.
yeah,
People don't see a reason for it because there's nothing there, and therefore they're still doing 40 when they hit the 20-mile-an-hour limits. So they've actually broken 2 speed limits now, and it's not policed at all.
okay.
The only thing I'd say is that somebody was booked recently doing 44 and a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in Fossaway. It was in the minutes, I noticed.
Yeah,
So-
it's not just that's not an isolation. I think there's also a report in Ward 1 where there was someone booked for speeding a 20-mile-per-hour. So police are aware, seems to be growing their resources and enforcing this, but it's quite sporadic. So yeah, it has been isolated reports of people being booked at speeding in the 20s. So yeah.
Right, so if you can pass the details on to me and also the report, I'll get that circulated to all the community councils and the other members. Is there
Sorry, the
anything else I
report. Do
want-
you mean the summary that I've got?
Yeah, the summary.
Yeah, that's no problem. I can circulate that, and you can come back with me any questions you've got. And Michael's bits in there as well. So if you've got any questions, you can ping him an email as well. Okay.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for your time. Is there any other questions or comments?
I think just, just actually make sure that we confirm that, as far as Michael goes with authorization to move ahead.
Yeah.
With the timescale, that's already covered. If there's
Yeah,
any kind
I'll pass it on to Michael, and it'd be good if you could have. I'll send this over, and you can also send that in an email to Michael himself, just so he has that
of any
instruction.
feedback people want, but I think as far as the authorization already existed, because he's just doing what was requested by this committee. So
Perfect. I'll pass it on to him.
Right, I'm conscious that it's 11 minutes past 7, so we've exceeded our time limit. There is one other item on here, but that's the budget update. We'll just put that in the minute because it's just the same as last time, so there's no need for that. Are we all happy? We will attend?
Oh, good, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending. And thank you for people online. We'll see you later on. Thank you.
Thanks.